Welcome back to another episode of A Very British Space Program. You find us just looking out at Messenger 9 as it's departing Earth at the end of the last episode on its way to Mars. In this episode, we're going to be doing some stuff about sending some things to other planets and dwarf planets, it seems. And also, we're going to expand on our Space Harbour project a bit. But please subscribe and please join me. So it is the 4th of December 1964, and around Venus we've got Messenger 4 carrying out a plane change, and this is just going to place it into a polar orbit. The idea is that it's going to stay in this sort of orbit, this polar-ish orbit around Venus for a while, before it lowers its apoaps even further in the coming weeks. It's going to stay quite high. It's going to do some science. It's basically there to carry out a lot of science. We've got our lander already on the surface. We've got our little orbital component of that lander that's going to transmit that data back to Earth, back to the boys in the lab. And Messenger 4 is just there to do its own science. It's not going to be part of that project. It's not going to be involved. It may act as a relay on its very low passes, but for the moment it's going to stay high up in that atmosphere and just make sure it gets all the lovely, lovely science. There you go, look at it all that way out there above the dusty ball of Venus. So, on the 6th of January, we're now into 1965. So, we've got Messenger 8 departing for Pluto. Of course, Pluto, we're not sure if this thing's actually gonna basically do well on this, because we've packed it with as much, shall we say, charge generating nuclear material as possible, but that degrades over time. We do have uprated communications. It's on the brink of our communications, so we should be able to communicate all the way out there. But this is new tech that's just come in. So you see there, we fire off our intermediate transfer stage, and then we've got the main engines on this craft burning. And we're using pretty much just lots of small thrusters on this craft. We've replaced the row engine because it's very heavy with small thrusters on this, because particularly for this craft, we're not going to try and capture Pluto. We're going to do a fly past, and this thing is very much going to use most of its fuel on the way there. Once we've set our course roughly with the main burn of the intermediate transfer stage, we don't worry too much about how long this burn's going to take. It's more about the long-term impulse than the short-term thrust that we're looking for here. So we've gone for these because they're lighter. They allow us to carry more energy with the craft and lighten it down a lot. And you can see the large antenna on the top there that's going to be required to transmit back to Earth, because it is a long way away, and this craft is going to take a long time to get there. So, after departing the Earth, it carries out a few further refinements, and we believe that Messenger might actually be able to fly past Charon as well as Pluto. That's the hope. We might be able to get a flyby of both of those bodies. If all goes well, Messenger 8 should pass by Pluto in 2018, which is a long way away. School children obviously get involved in the project. We want to try and move hearts and minds. They're asked to think about what the world will be like in that time. What will the world be like in 2018? What will be the crazy things that we will have? Flying cars, will Prince Charles, who will no doubt be king by then, will he still be king, or will it have passed on to his son by then? What will the UK be like? So, as that finishes up, we have another launch. This is the launch of Messenger 10. This is in preparation for an upcoming Neptune window. This is the 9th of January 1965, so 3 days after the Pluto departure. This goes up on a Blue Knight 2A rocket, and it's a standard launch for us now. This craft is becoming the workhorse. It's pretty much anything that we want to put into orbit that is up to about 20 tons. This thing will take up, and we're launching up another one of these sort of uprated Hesperus 4 craft, the Hesperus 4B, with its longer range communications, its slower burning second sort of probe engines. This thing just goes up there, goes up out of the atmosphere really nicely. Actually, it's a really nice launch. It's really going well. until we have a bit of a problem. Yeah, no, it isn't an engine problem. It isn't anything like that, because we don't seem to be having many engine problems at all at the moment, which is wonderful. We're not back in the days of the original Hesperus craft. Yeah, we have a fairing mishap. This is not the first time that we've had it with these vehicles. We actually had a staging mishap with the fairing, which means that the probe and so forth have actually been exposed to a thicker atmosphere than we would have liked. So that's going to require some checking out on the while it's on orbit. We need to check that out and make sure that everything's going to be okay with it, because there's always a concern that these things go horribly wrong. So this craft is actually going to go up into orbit, and it's going to stay in orbit for a few weeks while we check the systems. We're not in a rush to actually get it to depart. We have some other missions coming up. That's why we've actually launched it a week or so early. We were thinking of a potential quicker journey time, but this craft is going to sit for the most optimal, because we're hoping that this one will actually give us another orbital craft around Neptune. Neptune really interests us. This is our second probe that's going to head out towards Neptune. So there we go, just getting into orbit there, and we just see it's going up nicely. We have a little bit of delta V left just at the very end there, so we just make it up. It's a nice sort of mission for that craft. So moving on with our Space Harbour project, we have Endurance 2. This is launching from Spade Adam on a White Trident 2 rocket. This is an upgraded Space Harbour. What we've actually done is increase the power provisions and put some additional supplies for longer crew presence on board. We noticed the first Space Harbour, although it did have lovely space for crew, it was having some difficulties with its solar panels because they were pretty much fixed. So we've actually put some adjustable solar panels. We've just developed the ability to move them around, and that should allow us to shut down the fuel cells on the Faraday craft and save that fuel the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen for the return flight once the craft is actually docked to the Space Harbour. Because of that, we have actually put a little bit of extra mass onto this craft, which means it's going to have to do something that we don't normally do. We don't normally have our payloads actually put themselves into orbit. You can see there we're just checking that we've got active control of those solar panels, and you'll notice it's actually got two sets. It's got a large set at the top and a smaller set at the bottom to give us a little bit of redundancy there, a little bit of extra power supply. So the craft's coming up, and as with anything, as with all these launches with the White Trident, we're using all the engines to start with until we get towards the end of the burn, and then we're monitoring our actual G-force. Now, there we go, we've switched over, we've cut out 4 of those engines just to keep that G-force under control, because although this isn't crewed, we don't want to put stress through it, we don't want to damage anything, any of the pressure vessels that are involved, and we don't risk damaging it at all. So there we go, we're about to hit orbit, and then we detach and we use the engines on the actual Space Harbour just to pull it into position. There you see a little burn, using the RCS just to control it there. We don't have obviously any vectoring on these engines, they are fixed position, little thrusters on the bottom there. We pull out our smaller solar panels because they're just going to be there just to start hunting the sun, try and get us a little bit of electricity as soon as we can. Now, we do actually have a mission for putting up a space station, and so that's what we're actually doing. We're going to be completing a few different missions that we've got going on, time and space and things like that. And so this thing's going to put itself on the normal as we've seen before. And you can see it's got its standard docking port at the top. The only major change between this and Endurance 1 is the changing of the electronic system and the little addition of more supplies on there. One thing we do notice is the actual roll control on this. It likes to oscillate a little bit, and we're not sure why, whether we need to do a little bit of work with the roll control systems. We're not entirely sure. So what that does cause problems with is ensuring that these panels just stay facing the sun. So what we could have done is actually positioned the craft radially in with the docking port, and then these solar panels would track beautifully. We're actually putting it on the normal because it's prepared to receive crew situation. This is how we would normally dock crew to the station, to the harbour, not a station, to the harbour. We'd actually put it in the normal orientation, and then the craft can come in, and that's much easier docking for us that way. And then it would return to the potentially a position that's better for its solar panels. So that's up in orbit. what next? Well, we are launching on the 14th of January 1965 a Faraday 2, but this is not a Faraday 2 to actually dock with the Endurance. We're not sending up to the Space Harbour. This is actually just carrying out a long-term mission that we've had lined up. So this is actually flight F012. 011 has actually been delayed. We had a slight building problem with it, shall we say. We had to redo some checks. So the Space Harbour is going to be in orbit for a little while before we actually send any crew up to it, which is not a bad thing. We can actually see how these things work properly. So this is flight F012. We have Carol Freeman of piloting. She is the world renowned now, obviously, Carol Freeman, and scientist Deborah Newton. They're both experienced astronauts by now, and Carol actually being the first one of the first astronaut class of the UK is it's a poster child. They're obviously very happy to be up there and doing these things. What we do notice, though, is once separated from the upper stage of the Trident, when the RCS is supposedly disengaged, we are developing a random spin, and it requires all of the RCS to actually hold the craft in its direction of travel, shall we say. When the RCS is disengaged, we lose it. We actually start to lose it. We start to wonder whether it's got something to do with the fuel cell system, because that's obviously something new. We end up having to reboot the whole system. In reality, we have to actually reload the save at this point, but we have to reboot everything, which magically, it seems to allow us to take a bit more control back. The speed was increasing, which could have been quite dangerous for the crew on board, and it is something that is of a concern. It's not the first time we've had a phantom force, or shall we say an RCS or something problem with this craft. So you see there, we've now regained control, and then when RCS is disengaged, we are now back to normal. There we go. So we get our fuel cell systems online, make sure that we've got electricity. We could actually just, there you go, we can actually now turn the RCS off, and it does not cause a problem. So we've managed to fix that problem. Obviously something with the RCS that we need to look into, possibly some workers somewhere are problematic. Now you'll notice there, on our return from orbit, we were very late actually decoupling the service module. We actually were entering atmosphere when that happened, so we have to be careful about that. We're getting a little bit risky with that, and I should say this flight actually only took a couple of days. The crew went up to their sort of standard 190 kilometers by sort of about 350 kilometers, and then they increased that apoapse up to about 900 kilometers, stayed there for a day, and then they brought it back down. Now this is a nice high entry point we're coming in from, which is good for us testing the re-entry heating on this heat shield, which is supposedly designed for lunar re-entry, which is something we're going to potentially be looking at in the future. The concern with this mission was that torque, that phantom torque. We actually also used this mission, and one of the purposes of it was to actually try and use a little bit of lifting body approach. So you can see there the craft is really quite tilted over away from its normal sort of approach. Normally we go flat bottom very much into the airstream. Here we've got quite a bit of tilt going on there, and that requires that our pilot on board controls the roll of the capsule. You can see we've lost a bit of the control area of the capsule control. We obviously don't have the RCS strength that we wanted, or we've run out of RCS fuel. We're not entirely sure. We have to check that on the way down, but that initial first step when we're in the upper atmosphere seemed to go okay, so we're quite confident about being able to use that lifting body to control our entry a little bit. And then it's just a case of popping it through the atmosphere and to the point where the parachute's open, and bring down this craft, because there are a number of concerns now about what we actually saw in this mission. Those phantom torques, if they were to occur further out, shall we say at the moon, that would be problematic for us. So yeah, we need to look at that. Anyway, 29th of January 1965, we're moving on through the January, and we are watching the departure of Messenger 10 for Neptune. So this is going to basically be using all of that intermediate transfer stage, a good chunk of its probe fuel as well. But we want this thing to actually go into an orbit around Neptune. So we're going to basically be firing these engines up as much as possible. There we go. We got a nice transition there onto our probe. Sometimes we develop a spin there that we're not quite sure about. The probe does have some counterbalancing components there, but the RCS is required for a lot of what we do. And you can see minimal actual RCS fire on this. There we go. And off we go. So one of the other things that we actually did was about 19 hours after that initial burn, we then carry out an additional burn, and this is just designed to refine that path to Neptune. We want to try and get as close to Neptune as possible, ideally in a position where we can enter orbit and we can do some science, but potentially to look at some of the Neptunian moons. We want to look around the neighborhood, shall we say. We want to get an idea of what's going on, and this craft's going to hopefully give us that. We have other craft going to Neptune, but this one is going to be joining them. They're going to be having a good look, and you see there we just bring it in. We don't want to go entirely polar. We would love to go sort of equatorial in line with the plane of its moons. That's not going to happen. You can see there Titan Triton is one of its moons, and we're not going to be in the plane of that, which is annoying, but we can cope with it. So as we set Messenger 10 off to Neptune, and we have Endurance 2 sitting in orbit uncrewed, until next time, have a great one.